Everyone, we're going to go ahead and start here. If you don't know English, you should be able to follow with the subtitles below. Today I want to talk to you about the invention of the alphabet. For those of you who write in English or another script that uses an alphabet, every alphabet in the world goes back to the alphabet that was found in inscriptions in Egypt and Sinai that date back to the 19th century BC. I'm going to show some of those to you today and talk about the origin of the alphabet. So before I get into the actual letters and words and so forth, I want to talk to you about the importance. Why is this important? And so I'll start here. University professors routinely cast the evidence of the Israelite sojourn in Egypt and the Exodus as unhistorical or mythical. One Egyptologist wrote this about biblical stories. He said, "There is not a word in a text of an archaeological artifact that lends credence to the biblical narrative as it now stands. Egypt remains silent as it always has. From the Egyptian viewpoint, the Old Testament narrative records a series of earth-shaking episodes that never happened." Okay, end quote. So do you hear what he's saying here? The stories you read about in the Bible, they're mythical. They're pretend. They're fables. They're great stories, but they're not based on actual historical events. This is a university professor. You need to know something here. This is happening in colleges and universities in the United States and around the world as we speak. Way more than you even know. When I did my third master's degree and my PhD at the University of Toronto, I was stunned by how many of the faculty members there hated the Bible and had as a personal agenda goal to persuade students that you cannot trust the history in the Bible. That's one of their main goals. Another author boldly asserted this in 2018. He said that the Egyptian and ancient Near Eastern textual and archaeological evidence does not corroborate later biblical accounts of a sojourn and exodus. In other words, what he's saying here is, first of all, what you read about, the stories in the Bible about the sojourn and the exodus, they were written about maybe in 700 BC, 600 BC, 500 BC, 400 BC. Choose your favorite century. But long after the Bible suggests or indicates that they were written. So if it's hundreds of years later after the supposed events and they're writing about this, then probably it's not going to be very factual, right? So what they're suggesting is the Bible and all of its chronological references that suggest to us, that demand of us, that it was composed, at least by Moses, somewhere between 1446 and 1406 BC. That's wrong. It's hundreds of years later it was written. So you can't trust the stories that are in the text. You can't trust them. That's what they're telling us. And from hearing it myself as a student, as an adult, right? I was already a professor long before I was doing my PhD program. And so I went as a student. And I'm listening with all of the other, the other students in the class. Most of them are half my age, right? And so I'm hearing the professors telling them how untrustworthy the Word of God is. And, of course, my blood boiled. I was not happy hearing this because I knew better, but what about all of the other students in the class? They didn't know better. Some of them came from Christian homes, where Christian parents sent them off to university to get a good degree. And the parents didn't know what their children were receiving. But this is the kind of thing that's being taught in our schools. So, I don't know about you, but I think this is very alarming. This is very troubling. That's why this is important. That's why with many churches, at least in this country and Canada and plenty of other countries, when they send their kids off to college and universities, the kids are coming back, but they're not coming back to the church. They're leaving the church. Why? Well, probably lots of reasons, but way up there among the most important reasons is what they're hearing and being taught by their professors. So what we need to do, and for those of you who are anti-vaccine, you won't like this, and that's okay. We need to vaccinate our youth, our children, so that they can understand that we can trust the history that's in the Bible. Because here's the philosophy of the professors, right? If I can get these kids to disbelieve the historical events in the Bible, then they'll look at the rest of the Bible and they'll say, well, we can't trust the history. Why should we trust the spiritual message? Right? And that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So they undermine the history so that the spiritual can fall away or fly away. This is an epidemic, folks. We've got to vaccinate ourselves and our kids and the generation to follow. And that's why God has called me to this ministry, to help distribute vaccinations. Okay? You see how important this is? Another author vilified those who conduct research to explore whether these events are historical. He said this: since the rise of humanism in the Renaissance and the development of modern literary and historical methods of criticism, few events have been as controversial for historians as the Exodus. The traditional approach to the historicity of the Exodus gave large weight to the assertions of the biblical narrative, even when that narrative itself provided acknowledged ambiguities or even seeming contradictions. In other words, for him, you find a lot of contradictions in the stories about the time that the Israelites were in Egypt. So because we have these contradictions, how can you trust it? It's not consistent within the stories. That's the accusation. But folks, I have news for you. An accusation is not necessarily accurate. It's not. Not necessarily. And trust me, I've been accused of a lot of things. The challenge to explain the Exodus and to affirm its historicity has encouraged a rationalizing of biblical texts, leading to wishful thinking or special pleading. In other words, for him, and his Ernst Petrovich is his name, for him, it's wishful thinking to believe that Moses ever lived, to believe that Joseph was second in command in all of Egypt, that an Exodus actually took place where thousands of Israelites left from Egypt. That's mythical, that's wishing, that's special pleading. Well, really? Is that what the evidence shows? I want to show you just one area of evidence. If I could lock the doors and keep you in here until midnight, I would give you at least 5 or 6 lines of evidence to show you why those beliefs, those positions that these scholars have are false, and they can be proven to be false. So, to set the stage, I want to quickly show you a chronology of the events, the important events, and there's a lot here on this basic Israelite chronology slide, but I just want to focus on 2 mainly, which are 1876 BC. That's the year that Jacob's family moved to Egypt. Jacob took his whole family and they moved to Egypt in 1876 BC. Then, according to the Masoretic text reading of Exodus 12, 40 and 41, 430 years later, to the very day, the Israelites left Egypt. Now, they were no longer a family, but a nation, left as a massive nation that had grown over these 430 years. So that's the chronological framework. Chronology is very important because chronological passages in the Bible, especially in the Hebrew Bible, are all over the place. In year 6 and month 12 and day 5 of the reign of Jehoiachin, this happened in Israel, or Judah, right? It's very specific to the very day. And this happens over and over and over. You know what that tells me? It tells me this. Okay, question. How many authors, I'm not talking about Moses and Samuel and so forth, but overall, how many authors are there for one book of the Bible? For example, pick your favorite book. Genesis. How many authors? Moses, one. Any more? What makes the Bible different than any other book in the world? Different than any other book in the world. Dual authorship. Man and God. Right? Mm-hmm. God, according to 2 Timothy 3:16, it's the Greek word theopneustos, which means the breath of God. Right? God breathed out, and what came? The Scripture. So somehow, in an almost miraculous way, you have this amazing union between a human being writing and God who's breathing into this. Right? It's like the Trinity. This morning when I spoke, I didn't try to define the Trinity for you, did I? You can't define the Trinity. It's beyond definition. Right? So is dual authorship between human and man and God. Human and God. You can't explain that. It's divine. It's miraculous. So that's what separates the Bible from any other book. Because it was composed by man and God together. So, alright. Let's identify the language of the first alphabet. And this gets to the heart of the research that I did. So, there's a question that we can ask. Was an alphabetic script in existence then that the Israelites could have used? In other words, okay, Moses was born in 1526 BC. The Exodus happened in 1446 BC, and he died in 1406 BC, right? That's the lifetime of Moses. It's 120 years. So, according to what you read in the first 5 books of the Bible, it's screaming out at you that Moses is writing in a script that's known to all the people around him to read. And what's the language in which he writes? Right? So, up until now, we've not had evidence to confirm that it's Hebrew. You and I believe it's Hebrew. But how do we know? How can we prove it? And that's what today is all about, to prove that to you. So, was there an alphabetic script in existence that Moses could have used to write the first 5 books of the Bible? Let's see. Well, I've got 3 inscriptions here. All of them are proto-alphabetic. Proto means first. Alphabetic means, of course, the use of the alphabet. And technically, it's not an alphabet like English uses. English combines consonants, so there's many consonants, and several vowels. A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. Vowels. When they first composed the alphabet, they were mean and cruel. They did not use vowels. Shame on them. And that makes it more difficult to decipher. When you're a scholar who tries to understand what they wrote, with no vowels, there's some head scratching, and they don't have any spaces between words. It's one letter after another letter, continuous script. So that makes it difficult. So these are 3 inscriptions that are alphabetic inscriptions. On the left, the top one on the left here, in fact, I'm going to switch, if I can see this, to the laser pointer. So this inscription here, in a red rectangle, is the earliest known complete alphabetic inscription. It's known as Sinai 377, and right next to it, it's, okay, you know how you see pictures of the 10 Commandments and you see these 2 tablets, there's one tablet here, there's one tablet here? That's exactly what this looks like. These are called stelliforms. You can see more clearly the one on the left, this one. You see this outline? Follow that? That's the outline. So there's a big rock, huge rock, and somebody has a tool and they're etching into the tool, and they have an outline, and that outline is the stelliform, right? It looks like a tombstone from about 150 years ago in the United States. And then there's Middle Egyptian hieroglyphics written in, right? And I studied Middle Egyptian hieroglyphics for 3 years. It was the first minor of my PhD, so it's something I worked with a lot. And in this inscription, right up here at the top, you have a dating formula. And that dating formula helps date this inscription and this inscription, which are twin stelliform inscriptions. So this date dates both inscriptions. And the one on the right, it's only 4 letters long. It's known as Sinai 377. And when you take into account the date on the Egyptian stela, it takes you back to the reign of Amenemhat III. And it dates the year in his reign. So we know exactly what year and exactly which king in his reign. So that translates to 1840 BC. Let that sink into your mind for a minute. 1840 BC. Does anyone remember the year I showed you? It's the year that Jacob moved his family into Egypt. Anyone remember that year? You can check your phone if you took a picture. 1876. Is this before or after Jacob moves his family in Egypt? After. And you can already see the handwriting on the wall, right? I'm going to be trying to prove to you, I'm going to be suggesting to you, if I had more time, I would prove it. I'm suggesting to you that this is Hebrew. And it makes perfect sense. If they've been in Egypt for 36 years, right? 18 or 46. 36. They've been in Egypt for 36 years, and then this is composed, right? So, second one, this has a renal dating formula also, right there. That's an Egyptian renal dating formula. Renal, R-E-G-N-A-L. That means of a king, royal. So royally dated inscription. So it gives us the renal year here, and the number, it says renal year here, and then it gives us the number right there. And that inscription, and so all of this first line is Egyptian, right? And this is Egyptian. It ends in Egyptian. That's a hieroglyph. So all of these are hieroglyphs. And then everything in between, all of this, and then this here, which is broken up a little bit, all of those other pictographs are letters. What you see here is a bilingual inscription, which means there are 2 languages. It starts in Egyptian, it goes from right to left. Okay, it reads like this, right to left, Egyptian, 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 Egyptian. And then Hebrew, 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 Egyptian. You know what this is like? This is like a Mexican woman talking to her mother on the phone. Right? She talks to her mother, English, Spanish, English, Spanish, English, Spanish. That's what this inscription is like. So, and then there's a third inscription I'm showing you as an example. This is vertical line, or vertical column, and a horizontal line. Sinai 357. Ken On mentioned a scholar, an Egyptologist named David Roll, who, he doesn't know Hebrew, he doesn't know how to decipher these inscriptions. He had an acquaintance who was a modern-day Jewish, not priest, what's the word I want? Rabbi. A modern-day Jewish rabbi. So he had his rabbi friend look at this. And you know how the rabbi, and the rabbi was born and raised in the United States. Okay? The rabbi looked at this inscription, and do you know how he read it? He read it like this. Start, and that's the end of the column. And then this reads left to right. Okay? He read it like this. He followed an English speaker's understanding. Guess what? He was wrong. Right. Now, it could read that way. That's possible. Because the early Israelites who invented the alphabet, they followed the rule of Egyptian hieroglyphics. And here's the rule, the way to read. You can read from top to bottom, no problem. You can read from, for you, left to right, no problem. You can read right to left, no problem. But it's never written or read bottom to top. Never. Never, 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 never. No exception to the rule. Never. So, it's possible to read it like this. But, here's the thing. You really have to know the script. And you really have to know what you're doing in the work of deciphering to know if you should read it like this or some other way. And wouldn't you know, it actually begins on the far right and it reads right to left. And then you come back and pick up the vertical column here, and you read top to bottom. That's how it reads. Okay? I would never have known that unless I spent all of the time needed in research to understand every letter of the alphabet correctly, to be able to discern where you have words, right? And then I come to the inscription, and I carefully draw, right, or trace. I carefully trace every stroke of every letter, and then when I'm finished, I take away the photograph and I look at all of the letters, and then I start to figure out the possibilities for how it reads. Right? You have to be a scientist. You have to try all kinds of different ways and remove all of the wrong options. You know what that takes? You know what that requires? Time. It requires time. You have to put the time in. You can't just approach it casually. You have to put hundreds and thousands of hours into the work. That's what I did. All right. Don't get me excited. Facts about the world's oldest alphabet. The study of the earliest alphabet goes back to at least the third quarter of the 19th century, meaning before 1875. For all of these years since, scholars have been attempting to decipher the script. So, when I realized, and folks, I'm telling you, God just dropped me into the understanding that the oldest alphabet is Hebrew, right? I didn't expect it. My research just led me to it. When I understood this, then, and I knew almost nothing about the oldest alphabetic script. I knew almost nothing. I was a child. And my colleague, who's my father's age, so he's in his 80s now, Brian Coles, he told me, here are all the books and the journal articles you need. He said, you need to catch up on 175 years of scholarship. I do? Yes. So that's what I did. I caught up on 175 years of scholarship. And that took time. Lots of time. Because I needed to know what all the thinking was. How do they identify this letter? What's the sound? How do they identify this letter? How do they identify this letter? And what about when they disagree with one another? And there's a number of letters where they disagree with one another. So, you know what I had to do? I had to use trial and error. Trial and error. Try. Now, here's the thing. If you assign the correct phonetic value for a certain consonant, right? You try one option. If you've chosen the right option, it will be correct 100% of the time. It's like in ancient Israel. What did they do to the self-proclaiming prophet who said, yeah, God sent me and I'm giving you a word from God? What did they say? They said, you have to be correct 100% of the time. If not, what happens? Yeah, stoned to death. You die. Because it's serious. If you're going to speak for God, you really better be speaking for God, or it's trouble 100% of the time. So, in the same way, I had to work with this as a science, with every possibility, and check it and check it and check it and check it, and only when it's correct 100% of the time do I know it's correct. Less than that, and it's a wrong phonetic value. Virtually all scholars agree that the oldest alphabetic inscriptions in the world were composed in a Semitic language. For example, Amorite, Akkadian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Phoenician, Edomite, and so forth. Those are just some of the Semitic languages. All scholars agree, yes, it's Semitic. The oldest alphabet is Semitic. Virtually all scholars agree that the world's oldest alphabetic script was taken directly from Egyptian hieroglyphs in the sign list. So when I studied ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, I had to study the sign list. What does that mean? In English, we have how many letters? 24? Is that right? 24? 26? 26. I should know that. I'm a linguist. I should know.
Korean alphabet.
Oh, that I was thinking of Korean. So, the sign list, the Egyptian sign list, it has a few more than that. In fact, it has over 800 signs. Over 800 signs. That's a lot of signs. So you have to flip through page after page after page, looking at all of the columns of all of the hieroglyphs. You have to learn this, right? It's very challenging work. So virtually all scholars agree that the alphabet is the result of someone with Semitic blood who knows the Egyptian sign list and borrows, in Hebrews 22, borrows 22 consonants and uses it to create an alphabet. So, we'll talk more about that. A German scholar named Hubert Riemann in 1923 was the first person to suggest that Hebrew is the language of the first alphabet. But his work has a lot of problems in it. At that time, they didn't know the correct phonetic value for every one of the letters. And if that's true, you're not going to translate your inscriptions correctly very often. Only where you have words that you know, the whole word, you know correctly every one of those letters. But everywhere else, it won't work. So, anyway, he suggested that it's Hebrew. So I'm not the first person to suggest it's Hebrew. So if you think I'm that crazy, he was crazier. Okay? He was crazier. There are 4 main sites in Egypt and Sinai where these inscriptions were found. And folks, here's the amazing part. Do you know what the timing, the range of timing is for these? The oldest is 1840, and the youngest is from the reign of Amenhotep II, who I tried to prove in 2006 in a journal article that he's the Exodus pharaoh. So think about that for a minute. 1840 BC to the reign of the Exodus pharaoh, that time period is the only time period you will find, or so far that have been found, inscriptions, alphabetic inscriptions in Egypt and Sinai. That's the only time period. And what does it match with? The time from Jacob's arrival to Moses' Exodus. It matches perfectly. I mean, you couldn't draw it up better. If you were fabricating it, if you were creating this on your own, you wouldn't do better. So 4 places. Here in Sinai, southwestern Sinai, and here in Egypt and here in Egypt. So 4 sites. Wadi Nasib, which is right up in here. It's the water source for the miners who extracted turquoise from the mines at Seravit Khadim. Seravit Khadim is right there. Wadi El Hol, that's here in Egypt. And there are 2 inscriptions from Wadi El Hol that date to 1834 BC. They're connected to an Egyptian hieroglyphic inscription. That's datable, a dated inscription. Then there's Lahoun, which is right here. That's the first city to where Joseph went and commanded all of Egypt. So there's 1 inscription found at Lahoun. It's the one, remember I told you that it reads Egyptian, Hebrew, and finishes in Egyptian, right? Bilingual. That one is from Lahoun, where Joseph's family went. So there's that. And then the 4th site is here, Seravit Khadim, the site of this lucrative turquoise mining industry that Joseph's son Manasseh helped to he was a part of it. He was a leader. When he would go on these expeditions, he was one of the leaders of the expedition. And so Hebrew inscriptions are found in 2 sites here, 1 site here, and 1 site here. Just in the place where the Israelites are supposed to be. Wouldn't you know? No surprise. All right, publicizing of the research. Okay, so in 2014, the first Patterns of Evidence film came out. It's on the Exodus, right? This is an important film because it's giving at least three different views on when the Exodus actually happened. And it's from the perspective of a Christian, Timothy Mahoney, his picture is here, who's a Christian who's convinced that this is historical, right? So he gives these several options. Unfortunately, Tim Mahoney follows the wrong view, but that's okay. We still love him anyway. And I've talked to him many times trying to bring it into the light, but it hasn't worked yet. So I couldn't be a part of this film because I was working on my PhD still. I published I defended my dissertation in 2016. So if I appeared in a film like this, and at the University of Toronto and the PhD committee, if they found out about this, that I was involved in this film, you know what would happen to me? They would not let me graduate with my PhD. And I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. Because after I published my first book, one of my critics was a faculty member who was on my dissertation committee. And he had a very mean, very strong critique of my work. He wanted to destroy it. He even criticized me for studying at the University of Toronto where he was teaching. So anyway, I couldn't be a part of this. But in 2014, the first film came out, and it was actually in theaters. I went and watched it. It was great. Then my book came out, so I defended my dissertation in, March or April of 2016. And meantime, I was working on my book every free moment I had. And it was published officially at the end of the year in December of 2016, but it never went to the public until 2017. So when this book became public, Timothy Mahoney, that guy, he heard about my book. And so he bought a copy, and he started to read it. And his eyes went like this. They went huge. He couldn't believe that someone was suggesting that the oldest alphabet is Hebrew, and someone is saying, I've translated 15 inscriptions that are Hebrew from this alphabet. He was so excited. He was planning to make the film on Mount Sinai and the location of the giving of the law. That was going to be the focus of film 2. But when my book came out, you know what Timothy Mahoney did? Stop. We need a new film. Wait on the Mount Sinai. First, let's do a film about the historicity of Moses and about the idea that Hebrew was already in written form, a language that was in written form for Moses to use to write the first 5 books of the Bible. He changed his position completely about which film, what to do with this film. So he invited me to Minnesota, and I stayed with him and his wife. They're a great couple, great family, and he interviewed me over several days, and then he took certain parts of that and put it into the film. So that's this film, the 2019 film, The Moses Controversy, film 2 in the series. So I strongly encourage you to watch that film. I don't agree with everything in the film, okay, just so you know. I don't agree with Timothy Mahoney on everything. But I did critique the film. And it's like, 4 or 5 pages, or 6 pages of critique of the film. And I uploaded it to the public. It's on my academia.edu website. But my academia.edu website, you can get it for free. My critique of the film, if you're interested. And then in 2021, I published my second book, so the first book, okay, I don't know if you like guns, okay, but my first book is like a sniper rifle, right? Shot from a sniper rifle. It's very, very specific and pointed. This book, my second book, is like a shot from a shotgun. And it's a big, wide area, right? And so with the second book, I'm looking at all of the evidence for Israelites in Egypt from Jacob's arrival until the Exodus. I'm looking at their tools and weapons. I'm looking at the kinds of houses they lived in. I'm looking at the temples that they were building. I'm looking at everything I can find that gives us the possibility to know that these were Israelites. So that's my second book, and published 3 years ago now. So now let's connect the alphabetic script to Hebrew. So let's say, for example, that English has no script, and I want to invent a script in English. And I'm going to use the same principles that the originators of the alphabet used, okay, to do this. So I'm going to draw, and this is the extent of my ability in drawing. You can see my skill level. It stopped when I was 6 years old, okay? This is a boat. So in English, I look at that, and what do I think? I think boat. So what the Israelites, and in my second book, I try to persuade the reader that Ephraim and Manasseh, the 2 oldest sons of Joseph, are the inventors of the alphabet. I know that's a very, very controversial assertion. I know. But in my book, I try to prove that to the reader. So, in my mind, Ephraim and Manasseh, they were the ones behind the creation of the alphabet. So, let's say, for example, I'm creating an alphabet in English, and I'm using the same principles that Ephraim and Manasseh used. So I draw a boat, and I know that's the word boat, but all I want to pronounce is the B sound. So I see that letter, and I pronounce B. Now the bad news is, as with most languages, what comes next is a vowel, and they don't write vowels. So it becomes very challenging. What's next? Right? What's the vowel that comes after that? Could be O, E, A, E, several possibilities. So, and this is what? Door. Door. Makes the D sound first, so it's D. So we have B and D. B, D, B, D. And since Ephraim and Manasseh developed a script that didn't use spaces between words, I'm not putting a space between these letters. Right? But I can tell you that I've divided a word after the D sound. So B and D are together, then we divide. So there's a divider here. This is the first word, This begins the second word. It's another book. And this is what? Gate. Good. Book, good, book, good. What does this say and how many words? Well, of course, because we have no vowels, you have several options. But what I wanted to mean is this. And Hebrew follows, well, Hebrew is like Spanish. In Spanish, you write the noun first and the adjective second. Una camisa blanca. A blouse blue. White, sorry. A blouse white. But in English we say a white blouse. In Hebrew they follow Spanish. Noun comes first, adjective comes second. So this could be a lot of options. Bid, bed, bad, owed, and more. This could be bag, bed, big. But for me, I want this to mean adjective big, noun, bed. A big bed. At home, I sleep in a big bed. Right? So we've just created a script using the same principle that Ephraim and Manasseh used. That principle is called the acrophonic system. The acrophonic system. So that you look at a picture, you think of the word, and you pronounce the first consonant, in this case, consonantal sound. First consonant. That's what you pronounce. So we've just created a script, just like Ephraim and Manasseh did. So one thing that I had to do in my work is I had to solve the question of the phonetic value of every single letter correctly, right? And that took lots of work. So when I was finished, and I was convinced that I'm 100% right on every letter, right? When I became 100% convinced I got every letter correct, first thing I did is I went to a Hebrew lexicon, which is like a dictionary, and I looked up every single Hebrew word for each letter. And I tried to match. For example, so here are examples. Example 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But this is later in time. So here it's more pictographic. So what's the range of possibility for what this could be? And in every case, it seems pretty clear this is an ox. Right? There's almost no dispute there. So that then matches with that needs to match with a Hebrew word that starts with that same vowel and consonant. And this consonant, it's one that we don't use in English. It's a guttural. It's a guttural consonant. So one of the few words possible that matches this picture, right? This picture, is the word Aleph, which means ox. Aleph means ox. Aleph. So that's a match. Look at, for example, the third letter. This letter. That's modern Hebrew speakers write the letter this way. They say Gimel. Gimel. And it's a good sound. But originally it was this. Alright? Based on this hieroglyph. And in Joseph's lifetime, this is how they wrote the letter. Now, what's common about this letter, and this letter? Anybody want to tell me? And this letter, and this letter. What's common about all of these? They all have one thing in common. Bend. In the middle, they're bent. Now, look at this. For those of you who like geometry, what kind of angle is this? Is it? What is this? Is that more or less than 45?
More than 45, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Less than 90, yes. Less than 90. Yeah. Less than 90, less than 90. What about this? A little more than 90, right? And this one?
More.
A little more than 90. What about this one?
Right about.
Almost perfect right angle. So this is the range of possibility for how to write the letter. So you have to look for the common feature. It's a bend. It's a bend with an acute angle. It's a bend with a right angle. It's a bend with an obtuse angle, right? In every case. So what that tells me is I should be looking for a word in Hebrew that's connected to the idea of a bend. And what do you know? If you look up in a Hebrew dictionary lexicon, that word, gaher, starts with a g sound. So it makes perfect sense with every letter that's within that range of possibility that a g can work, because they're all bends. They all have a bend in common. So that's the process that I had to go through to connect a written picture, a pictograph, to connect it with a word. And so I had to be 100% sure again that I was identifying every letter correctly to match it with a perfect Hebrew word that it was meant to be connected with by the original creators of the alphabet. So I did this with every letter, folks. Lots of time. Speaking of which, when am I finished?
Go ahead. You can take mine.
He's watched this movie before, but he's excited for you. So I had to do this with every letter. This is the beginning of the alphabet. Remember, there are 22 letters. This is the end of the alphabet. With every single letter. And in a couple cases, let's see, do I have one up here? Yes. So with this letter, this is another guttural letter, chet, in modern Hebrew, chet. It had two options, folks. This option and this option. So, and here's an example of the first. Here's an example of the second. Here's another example of the second, another of the second, and the first. And this represents a movement in time. So this is this is Joseph's lifetime, dynasty 12. Moses' lifetime, dynasty 18. And this is the period of the monarchy. Part of the period of the judges into the monarchy. So over time, and I want to show you this because there's a competition between these letters. Which one will win the competition? Now, which one is stronger? Well, what I came to be convinced of was, if there's competition, the one that will win is the one that's easier to draw. It's easier to draw. Sorry about that. That's a bad thing for an artist, right? It's very practical. Why? Because look at the movement of the change in the letters over time. This is very pictographic. You know exactly what that is, right? But look at it over here. Do you know what animal that is? Can you tell me what animal that is? I can't. This animal? This animal? No. But look, over time, it becomes less and less pictographic and more abstract. Why? Human nature. You can write the script faster if you don't make a beautiful drawing, right? If you make it abstract, just a couple of strokes, and you're done, and move on to the next letter. Otherwise, it will take you forever to write a note to your daughter, so she does the things at home before you come back. Right? So it's practical. It's very practical for it to become less and less pictographic. Does that make sense? Okay, good. You're with me. All right, so this, if you want to take a photo of this, you can, I suppose, if you want up with your camera, but this is just a list of all of these inscriptions that I've translated and showing where they're from. So Sinai, Wadi El-Hol, that's so Sinai Peninsula, Egypt, Lahun, that's in Egypt, Sinai, and then we come down to here. There are now 3 new inscriptions, new within the last 5 years, let's say. Okay, so in my field, that's really, really new. In the last 5 years. 3 new inscriptions. The Lachish ivory comb, I already published on this. It's from the city of Lachish. It's right there. It's in Canaan. In the article, I tried to suggest that it was composed, it's written on a comb, an ivory comb. And I suggest that originally that probably was an Egyptian's ivory comb. Because if it's ivory, it's expensive. And the Hebrews at this time were poor slaves. Right? So probably, and the Bible says very specifically, that the Israelites plundered the Egyptians, right? So some, and again, speculation, I know, I'm not going to the wall for this. You can't hang me for this. I'm suggesting that a Hebrew person took this ivory comb from one of the Egyptians, just like the Bible says they did, and took it into the desert. What are the Israelites doing for 40 years after the Exodus? Right? They're going crazy. They have nowhere to go. They're not building any houses. They're not building any cities. They're wandering from place to place, eating manna that falls from the sky. It's a crazy life. That's what they lived. So they're not busy, are they? So somebody who took this ivory comb decided, hey, I've got time on my hands. I'm going to write an inscription here. So that's exactly what this Israelite person did, wrote an inscription. And then probably that comb was taken with that person all the way until they went into the land of Canaan and conquered it. And then that comb ends up in a trash pile at Lachish, right before the Babylonian captivity of 587 BC. Isn't that amazing? And it was, what do you call the points on the comb? They were broken off. Teeth. The teeth of the comb were broken off. But it had this inscription from hundreds and hundreds of years earlier. If you match it with the other inscriptions, it fits right around the time of this column. The column in Moses' day. Amazing. Amazing. And then there's a Lachish milk-bowl ostracon. I published on this already. Oh, I'm sorry. I published on the milk-bowl ostracon already. The Lachish ivory comb inscription. My article is in peer review right now, waiting to be approved so it can be published. Okay? And I've deciphered that inscription. And then there's the Mount Ebal curse tablet. Has anyone heard about the Mount Ebal curse tablet that came out? It was in the news maybe about a year or two ago. So that's another very important inscription. It gives the covenant name of God. This morning, when I use the word "He goes on existing," that's the English translation for the Hebrew word for the covenant name of God. He goes on existing. That's the covenant name of God. That name, for the first time in history, does anyone know where or when or to whom it was revealed for the first time? Who was the first person to hear the covenant name of God? Not Abraham. I talked about it this morning, though, actually. I alluded to the event. The burning bush, Exodus 3. Moses said to God, okay, I understand what you're telling me, but if I go to the people and tell them this message, they'll say to me, which God sent you? Right? Who sent you? And Moses said, can you tell me your name? God didn't say, no, I won't tell you my name. He said, sure, I'll tell you my name. Here's my name. I go on existing. I go on existing. Yeah. I go on existing. What does that name connote? Yeah, that's the Hebrew word. Yahweh. Yahweh is the Hebrew word behind it. But what is it? It's connoting the eternality of God. That He always existed, that He exists now, and He always will exist. All of that idea is wrapped up into one word. One word. And that's God's revelation to Moses. My people Israel will know me by my name. I go on existing. And that name of God, think about that. If the people understand that my God is the one who goes on existing, He doesn't stop. He never began, He'll never end, and He's there now. What does that give them? hope, comfort, joy, victory, anticipation, right? Lots of amazing things come if you know that's the name of your God. And that's what God wanted to communicate to them. So that name of God was found on an inscription from Mount Ebal. That's right here in Canaan again. That's the very place where, when the Israelites, after the conquest began, God told them, even before the conquest, God told them, I want you to go to a place where there are two mountains. And on one mountain, you're to give a blessing. On another mountain, you're to give a cursing. Right? This inscription was found at the cursing mountain. Isn't that amazing? A Hebrew inscription with the covenant name of God. Wow. So that shows you that the inscriptions follow with the Hebrews. Right? The inscriptions follow with the Hebrews. If 1446 is the right year for the Exodus, then the correct year for the conquest is 1406 BC. And all of these inscriptions, well, this one, the Lachish Ivory Comb, I'm suggesting that was composed before, during the wandering in the desert for 40 years. But these two were composed after they came into the land of Canaan. And what do they date to? Where do they date to? They date to the very time of the conquest under Joshua. Joshua's conquest, 1406 to 1400 BC. Fits perfectly. So, all right, now we're going to look at several inscriptions. The first individual inscriptions. The first one I want to show you is Sinai 115. Ken referred to this before. So this is 8 to 9 feet tall. I don't know what that is in meters, but maybe you can convert that if you prefer meters. 8 to 9 feet tall. What is it? Well, if you go back 150 years in the United States, it looks like a tombstone in the West, where a person is buried. But this is not a burial monument. This is, it's like a journal entry. It's telling what happened during that year when the Egyptians sent a team on an expedition to extract turquoise from Servi Okabi, from these mines. Right? So what the Egyptians did is, while they were there, they had one person who was writing out what was happening during that expedition. It's a journal. And so it's from top to bottom, it goes from right to left, right, like this, goes like this. And then at the bottom, there's a drawing. See that? That's a drawing. Now let's look at a close-up of that drawing as soon as he takes the picture. So, there we go. Okay. So that's zooming in on the bottom. So we see a donkey, right? That's a donkey. That's a boy. This is a little rope that's connected to his hand and to the, what do you call that? Yeah, in the neck area of the donkey. And then this is a person sitting on top. Right? See that person sitting on top? Now you can't see this because weathering has damaged this stela over millennia. And there was a boy standing here originally. And there's a caption here. This part of the caption, an Egyptologist of the 20th century correctly deciphered that word. It's a Middle Egyptian word. Except this is not a hieroglyph. And then the second word is just numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A vertical stroke means 1 in ancient Egyptian. 1, 2, 3. So that's 6. 6. And Egyptians did the same thing. They put the adjective second after the noun. 6, each and we. Who are the each and we? Each and we is the way that the people who lived in the land of Canaan and Syria, it's the way they would write who they are. They call themselves each and we people. So these are 6, each and we people. These are non-phonetic. They're called determinatives. They have you don't pronounce them. And then the inscription continues. So what I did is, this is a composite. I used several photographs, and I wrote in all of the strokes of the hieroglyphs and then I pulled away the picture, and that's what's left. Okay? That's what's left. Now, when I looked at this, and folks, I already knew at this time that this guy here, that almost certainly is Manasseh, the oldest son of Joseph. If you want to know why I'm convinced about that, read in my second book, Origins of the Hebrews. I give a very detailed explanation there. So that's I knew this is Manasseh. So if he's the one, and every Egyptologist is convinced that this guy seated on the donkey is the one who writes the journal entry for this year of the expedition. And every time he goes, he's the one who's writing. His Egyptian name is Chededed. Chededed is a passive participle in Egyptian. It means he who was disfavored. He who was disfavored. What does that mean? Favor was taken away from this person. What happened to Manasseh? Favor was taken away from Manasseh. The birthright of the firstborn son was to go to Manasseh, but Jacob said, no, you don't get the birthright. Number 2 son gets the birthright, Ephraim. You will be great, but your brother will be greater. That's what Jacob said. So, that's the Egyptian name for this guy. He who was disfavored. And folks, listen to this. Listen, this is very important. No other human being in Egyptian history, before this or after this, ever was named Chededed, he who was disfavored. Nobody else. Only this guy sitting on a donkey. Who gets this name? Well, in the ancient world at this time, you didn't receive your name at birth. Unless you're the Pharaoh, and that's one of your 5 names. It's called your birth name of the Pharaoh. I lost my train of thought. Oh, Manasseh, yeah. So you receive a name in the world of this time. You receive a name when something in life distinguishes you. It's like the Native Americans, right? Running Waters. This Native American is called Running Waters. Why? Because every time we can't find him, he's down by the spring where the water is going. Yeah? So he's always by the running waters. So let's call him Running Waters. See how that works? So the Native Americans used the same philosophy as in ancient times. So whoever this guy is, he's somebody that what distinguishes him is he was disfavored. Favor was taken away from him. So anyway, I'm convinced that that's Manasseh. So the next word on this inscription, Ivre. 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 Now, when I first saw this inscription, and of course the Egyptologist of the 20th century, he didn't translate this word. He didn't translate this word. He didn't translate this word. And he didn't translate this word. So I had to figure it out. And it took me weeks to figure it out. Weeks to struggle through trying to figure it out. But I knew something was strange. This pictograph and this pictograph, I knew these pictographs are not part of the sign list. They're not hieroglyphs. There's something strange, something different. I was scratching my head wondering, what are these? It's not part of the hieroglyphics. It's something different. So I contacted Brian Coles and I said, Brian, I'm going to send you this picture. You tell me, what is this and what is this? He said, oh, that's easy. He said, this is a Canaanite syllabic, which means a syllable. It's Canaanite. That's a Canaanite pictograph. And he said, this one is a pictograph. This is an alphabetic letter. That's an alphabetic letter. Everything else here is hieroglyphs, except these two. This one and this one. So this is Canaanite, and this is alphabetic. That's very strange. So it tells you whoever composed this was an Asiatic person who was different than the Egyptians and knew the Canaanite syllables. It's called the syllabary, but knew all the Canaanite syllables And this, folks, is the oldest attested example of an alphabetic letter. The oldest in history. It dates to, look at the date, 1842 BC. 2 years before the oldest inscription from 1840. Jacob died in 1859. Do you know what Jacob did in the year of his death? In around 1859? He stole the 2 oldest sons of Joseph from him, Manasseh and Ephraim. He said this to Joseph. He said, as for the rest of your children, they're yours. But these 2, they're mine. You know what he did? He stole them. He took them away. They lived with their uncles. Jacob knew. He knew. He thought, I'm about to die. How are my sons going to survive in Egypt? They don't know the language. They don't know the culture. They don't know the religion. They don't know the people. How do they survive? Well, guess who visits him just before he dies? Joseph, with his 2 eldest sons. And Jacob can't see perfectly at the time, but he sees a little bit of what these 2 sons are like, and he looks at them, and what does he think? Oh, these 2 boys, these are Egyptians. And if they live with their uncles, my sons, then these boys can teach the culture and the language and the business world to their uncles, right? So evidently, God put the idea in Jacob's mind to steal the 2 oldest sons of Joseph from him and make them live with their uncles. And here we are, 17 years after that. And what do we see? The first alphabetic letter. Isn't that amazing? So, what does it read? Well, this is a very busy drawing, but it reads 6 Levantines, 6 people from the Levant, Hebrews of Bethel, the beloved. What's Bethel? That's the home city of Jacob and his family before they moved to Egypt. God tells them. God specifically goes to Jacob. He says, Jacob, you have to move your whole family. And you know where you're going? You're going to that place where we wrestled. Bethel, house of God. Bethel. You're going there. And you're taking your family. So that became the new home city of Joseph's family. And when Joseph was taken away into Egypt as a slave, the family was living at Bethel. So when Manasseh writes this is Bethel, right there. That's Bethel. When he writes Bethel, what's he writing? His beloved home city. For me, I come from Akron, Ohio. Anybody know LeBron James? Anybody know the name LeBron James? He's from my city. I'm not from his city. He's from my city. I was born before he was born. So Akron, Ohio, for me, there's always a heart with it. That's my beloved home city. What was Manasseh writing? We are 6 people, 6 from the family of Jacob, right? We are 6 people who came from the Levant, came from Canaan. Hebrews of, what's our beloved home city? Bethel. And this hieroglyph right here, that one, that means beloved. Beloved. It's our beloved Bethel. Akron, Ohio is my beloved Akron. Right? Every time I go and visit, my heart just feels heavier, sinks deeper, because I'm not there all the time in Akron, in my home city. So this inscription is the oldest inscription by far to mention Hebrews, all the way back to 1842 BC. At the top of the inscription is the date, the year of the rule of Amenemhat III. So it's got to be the 19th century BC. And that's the time when the alphabet already had to be created, invented. Okay? So, all right, how many more minutes should I? Give me 5 more. Okay. I'm going to skip the Wadi al-Hol inscription. Oh, this is the one I talked about this morning, with Ale at the bottom. Okay? It's a very important inscription. Let me go to a different inscription. Oh, this one. Let's do this one, our last one. Sinai 376. Okay. So look at this inscription. Can anybody tell me, is this horizontal or is it vertical? Vertical. And what we can see from this image is how many columns are clear? Actually 4. So these are the 3 clears. 1, 2, 3. And there you can see there's a 4th. And what I did is I used PowerPoint and I zoomed in 400% to see clearly, right? 400%. And I found that I could identify the letters that were here. And when I finished the inscription, you know what I found? So it reads this way. That's the first vertical column. That's the second vertical column. That's the third vertical column. And that's the fourth. You know what I found? I found that the fourth vertical column, that a word ends right here. And then here we have one pictogram. We saw this before. This is the ch sound. It's a thread. That's the drawing of a thread pictograph. I found that this word ended right here, and here this is just one letter. And I knew it's not possible to have a whole word with one letter. That's not possible. There's a problem there. So you know what I did? I went back to my PowerPoint and I zoomed in at 400%, and I decided, I looked. I looked. Is it possible there's a letter down here? I found nothing. And this, you can see there's a defect in the stone anyway. And then I looked closer right in here, in this area. You know what I found? There's one more letter. No other scholar found this. I only found it because I knew where the words begin and end. And then you can't have a word with one letter. So, we now remove it, and you see that letter? That's the letter that was missing. So, this is the whole inscription. So it reads, the house of, Beit is house of, the house of Kerem, which is the vineyard, the house of the vineyard of Asna. I knew that's a name, right? So I looked up in the Bible, is there any name Asna? You know what I found? There's one name, Asna. I didn't know this name by heart, by memory. This is the name of Joseph's wife. Did anybody know that? Anybody know that? I didn't know it. Asna is the wife of Joseph. And I thought, that's crazy. And there's no other Hebrew person in the Hebrew Bible, woman, whose name is Asna. Only one, the wife of Joseph. And this inscription is datable, dates to 1772 BC. But I also knew Joseph died in 1805, and he was 110 or 120, one of those. 110 years old. And he dies in 1805. So this is 33 years later. 33 years later. So if his wife is alive, she is 143 years old. Which made me realize, probably, this is posthumous. She's already dead. She's not alive anymore. So, once I translated it, it makes sense. House of the vineyard of Asna. And then it says, and its innermost room were engraved. They have come to life. What does this mean? The house of the vineyard of. When I lived in Russia for 10 years, most of my Russian friends, especially the older ones, they had a summer garden. And they would go to the summer garden at the end of spring, and sometimes they would live where their garden is for the summer. And you know what they would do? They would build this little, I would call it a shack, right? Little miniature house. They would build a miniature house. They would live there. Why? To protect against other people who come and steal their vegetables they're growing, right? To protect it. And then they wake up in the morning, and then they work on the garden, and then they go to sleep there, and so, and they call this a dacha. This place is a dacha. And you know the word. And it's a good Russian word. And so, at the end of the harvest season, they would take their vegetables and they would go home and they would have these vegetables for the entire winter. So, some people still practice this, right? Around the world. Some cultures, many cultures, practice this. Summer inside your garden. So that's what they were doing here. But it wasn't, in Russia it's potatoes and what else? Potatoes, squash, tomatoes, and my wife could do this better. And a couple more, right? Vegetables. But here, it's not one of those vegetables. It's a vineyard, so it's grapes to make wine. These people were winemakers and wine sellers. We know this from the archaeology. Okay? I won't go into all the detail, but millions of gallons of wine was imported from Canaan and Syria into Egypt through Avaris, where the Israelites were, and then sold. So the Israelites, their number one main business was reselling wine. Can you believe that? Now, I don't know about Koreans, but many American Christians, you never drink any alcohol. It's wrong. It's terrible to drink one sip of wine or one beer. No alcohol. I don't know about the Korean church, but in America that's true. And so many American people were, when I speak about this, they're very sad to learn that the Israelites were making money from selling wine. And they became filthy rich from selling wine. So anyway, this makes perfect sense to me because they're wine sellers. So what happened here? What happened was they made a vineyard and they named the vineyard. They gave it a name. What name was given? Well, what I've learned in my study of the site of Avaris is Joseph was the first mayor of the city, of the town, among the Asiatics, the Hebrews. He was the first mayor. And he gave this role to his son, Ephraim, second born. Remember the one that Jacob gave the birthright to him? So Ephraim became the mayor, and what do I want to say here? I lost my train of thought. So they made this vineyard, and that shows you, that proves to you that the son of Joseph, Ephraim, is the number one most important, the highest ranking person in the city. Number one. So who's given this name of the vineyard? No. This vineyard is named after whom? It's named after the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim, the mayor of the city. Right? So a vineyard is made. What do we call it? Ask the mayor. Who makes the decision? The mayor makes the decision. He makes the decision. So what does he do? The mayor decides, I'm going to call this garden, I'm going to name it after my mother, who's dead. I'm going to name it after my mother. Maybe when the vineyard was made, she was alive. I don't know. But what I do know is it's named after their mother, and it was beautified. The house and the innermost room were engraved. And you know what, folks? And I'll conclude with this. There are 3 words in this inscription. Beit, Devir, and Kalab. Beit, Devir, and Kalab. 3 Hebrew words in this inscription. And they're right here. Right? So the house of Asnath's vineyard. The innermost room. And engraved. Right there. Right? Well, if you look at the description of the first temple, right? The first temple. That Solomon built in 1 Kings 8, it uses the term Beit. This is the house of, and then it's the name of God. Covenant name of God. It's his house. And it uses this term innermost room. And we have a word for this in English. It's Holy of Holies. Have you heard that before? Holy of Holies. That's the same room, the same word, that's Devir. The same word that's in this inscription. What does that tell you? It tells you that it's the same architectural style. And you have an innermost room. And the innermost room, that's where the person would sleep. It's the most personal room in the whole house. Almost no one goes in there except the person who owns the house. And that's it. It's the innermost room. And then what did Solomon do? Solomon carved all of the temple's walls with engravings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers both with the inner and outer sanctuaries. So Solomon instructed, and God is the one behind this, Solomon instructed craftsmen, artisans, to carefully carve out pictures of palm trees and flowers and cherubim on the walls of the temple. Isn't that amazing? Why? To make it beautiful. That's the exact same thing that happened hundreds of years earlier at this summer garden house. They beautified it by carving the innermost room with engravings. So the exact same things, exact same words used of the creation or the building of the first temple were used in this inscription. What does that tell you? It's Hebrew. No other language. It's Hebrew. Hebrew is the language of the world's oldest alphabet. Thank you.